A year after the invasion, Putin is desperate to win in Ukraine. He's got every bot, every paid for commentator going, trying to confuse people. So here's 5 myths and a bit of a dose of reality. Should we trust anything Russia says? When Putin invaded last year with 100,000 troops, he tore up treaties guaranteeing Ukraine's independence that Russia had voluntarily signed in 1991, 1994, 1997, 2008, and 2014. Since Putin came to power, Russia has invaded its neighbours in 1999, 2008, and 2014. So, NATO, which is a defensive alliance, has expanded because the countries that live next to Russia have got increasingly worried about who Putin is going to invade next. And it's the same for Ukraine. Are there Russian speakers in Ukraine? Yes. Are they under threat? No. 60 million people outside Russia speak Russian as a first language, including, by the way, President Zelensky of Ukraine. As well as all of the Baltic states and many Central Asian states, there's actually nearly 4 million Russian speakers in Germany and the USA. But Putin's not, last time we checked, claiming that Russia's got a right to invade those places. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian constitution provides protection for Russian speakers, which they reaffirmed most recently in the 2015 Minsk Accords. Yeah, good idea. Let's chuck the Nazi word around and see if that makes people scared. Zelensky, of course, as well as being a democratically elected president, is Jewish. He also grew up speaking Russian as his first language. Meanwhile, Putin, definitely not a Nazi, has passed laws banning people from even using the word war. He's shut down every single free press institution in Russia. He's transphobic, he's homophobic, he's a misogynist, and he's a racist. Oh, and by the way, his troops have been systematically raping and murdering civilians every part of Ukraine that they've occupied. It's definitely not our fight, it's Ukrainians' fight. They're the ones dying in their tens of thousands, not us. But if Putin manages to get his way, if he manages to occupy all of Ukraine, which is what he has said publicly he wants to do, what are the consequences for us here in safety? Well, Russia fundamentally doesn't believe that individual countries have the right to choose their friends, their alliances, their governments. Putin cannot live with the idea of independent countries on his border that don't follow his rules. And if he succeeds in occupying Ukraine, he will occupy the next country and the next country and the next country. It really is that simple. Putin's already sent 100,000 of his conscripts into the meat grinder. He's got at least 200,000 more this year alone. Next year, he'll get even more. Russia isn't going away. This is not a problem that's going to solve itself. As for the cost, well, energy prices were going up before the invasion started, and they started coming down actually last November. Meanwhile, in terms of the money that we're spending, the UK is spending less than 5% of our own defence budget, let alone the rest of the budget, on stopping Putin in his tracks before he invades a NATO country, which obviously would be war. So to me, that seems pretty cheap. And in terms of when this will end, just remember that as soon as Russia stops its invasion, sends its troops home, withdraws to its own internationally recognised borders, this war can stop. If Ukraine stops fighting, there isn't a Ukraine. Yeah, in one sense, NATO opposing the illegal Russian invasion is pretty ironic, really, given that NATO invaded Iraq, Afghanistan, bombed Libya, and that moral high ground is one of the reasons why me and lots of other people that I know were against those wars, did demonstrate against them in our hundreds of thousands. But if you set aside for a moment the fact that Ukraine is a democracy and Iraq and Afghanistan were totalitarian states, You've also got to think about the fact that Ukraine didn't do any of the invading of Iraq and Afghanistan. They were just peacefully getting on with their lives until Putin invaded them. So if you pull the Iraq line, you're basically gaslighting 40 million Ukrainians.